Greetings and welcome to the Modern Alchemist channel. I'm Aubrey Forrest, the Modern Alchemist, and this is the 2016 Essentials of Practical Alchemy workshop. Today we're going to be covering class number 2, which is Symbolism and the Occult. And we had a wonderful time. I want to thank Ray and Maggie again at Earth Magic for supplying us a wonderful classroom. And I want to thank everyone who attended, both online and physically live at the class. It made everything wonderful. So let's get started, and next week we will be discussing mythology and mythological archetypes. All right, with that said, let's begin the class. Hello world! Greetings and welcome to Essentials of Practical Alchemy, the 2016 workshop. And I'm Aubrey Forrest, the Modern Alchemist, and this is the Modern Alchemist channel. Today, this is class 2, we're going to be discussing the occult, and we're going to be talking about symbolism. Now, the occult itself has gotten a bad name, a horrible name, and largely I think that's a result of people taking advantage of the ignorance of other people. The truth is, the word occult means nothing more than that which is hidden. So if you want to conceal something, you would occult it. Similarly, if you're looking at crystals or gems, things which are occluded are clouded, okay? So meaning that the visual capacity is now reduced. You can't really see what's going on. So in normal usage, we occult information all the time. We keep secrets from our parents, from our friends, from ourselves. If we work in a business, and let's say it's a restaurant, you might have some secret sauce, right? That you occult that information, you conceal it. It's hidden from everyone else out there. Everyone can partake in it, they can see it, they can use it, but unless they have certain keys, they won't get to understand what's really going on. So a lot of that has to do, and you see a lot of this is associated with what's known commonly as Illuminati symbolism. And so you get the all-seeing eye and a bunch of references to Freemasons, and people get a little shaky because it all is occult information, right? In order to get in there, you have to be able to get in there. It's sort of like that scene in John Constantine when he goes, Keanu Reeves' version, and he's going into that bar.
This bar, John, please? I'm begging you, John, please, please. Sure, you can get in. I can get in? If you can get in. What? If I can get in. It's a bear, though, right? Or two ducks in it.
And, the guy behind him, he's like, oh, let me come in. He's like, hey, you can get in if you can get in. And that's literally the way this works. So in some ways you can invite yourself simply by studying the material for what it actually is and not what you believe it is or think it is or what other people think it is. In order to understand what is occult, you need to set aside what you personally believe something is, and you need to understand what the person who's doing it believes they're doing, right? Because that's the only one who's really important. So if someone's engaged in some kind of operation and it's visible to the public, you can speculate all day long about what you think they're doing, but it's more important to understand what they think they're doing, because they're the ones who are conducting the operation of consciousness. You are fulfilling the role of witness. The same process of operations in consciousness for anything that happens, okay, in the world, any kind of operation in consciousness, we'll scrap here. It involves 3 things. You always must have these 3 elements in order for an operation of consciousness to function. You must have a director, an actor, and an audience. And as you move up from bottom to top, you'll have degrees of illumination. So in the case of a wedding, all right, the priest is fulfilling the role of director, the wedding couple are fulfilling the role of the actors, and of course you have witnesses who are the audience. This is conducted in every single operation of legal stuff. Any legal operation requires this. This could be a judge and jury and witnesses, right? So these are all operations which we see regularly, and of course in movies you see this, right? This is a description of every movie you've ever seen, where there's the director who has the clear image. I want things to be here. I want this can to face this way. I want these people to be looking in that direction when I'm shooting them. The actors may or may not actually understand what they're doing, and the audience does not need to understand anything. They need only to observe, so that what they're seeing is emplaced in general consciousness. So all of the stuff that we're going to talk about today deals with expressions of consciousness. Every symbol. And symbols come in different flavors, all right? A simple symbol, there's a simple symbol, which is just a thing, like for instance, a cross, okay? A cross, all by itself, that is just a simple symbol, okay? And in order to understand what this means, you would have to understand all of the associated narratives of this symbol, plus the context from which it's drawn. Last week, I mentioned that the worst thing you could do is take a symbol outside of its context and then try to interpret it, because now you're losing all the referential material that actually defines the symbol as it is. This is probably the greatest problem with occult information, is because as we extract the symbols, we lose the context wherein they're living, wherein they reside. And so if you do that, then you lose the meaning. A more complex symbol is what I call a cognitive thought form. Okay? And this can take the form of anything from a statue or a flag or currency, but what these are layered symbols. Okay, so if you pull out your dollar bill, that thing is just layered and layered and layered in symbolic meaning and relevance. In order to fully understand it, though, you need to understand who designed the bill, what they were thinking, what they probably believed, what their cosmology is, what their ideology is, and how that applies to the concept of currency. The dollar bill as a symbol is probably one of the single most potent cognitive thought forms on the planet, simply by virtue of the fact that every single function of human consciousness will touch a dollar bill at some point. That's amazing. And the reason I say that is because the petroleum is purchased with US dollars. Like the petroleum industry is standardized under this. If you follow the politics of petroleum, you'll find the reason why we're at odds with Russia and a few other states is because they would like to use a different form of currency to establish what the oil is built under. Symbols like this are really, really important because it's not just economics, it's grappling with human consciousness. Right now, for anyone to drive their car, heat their food, or build pretty much anything in the modern 21st century, you're going to need some kind of petroleum product. Either someone will have driven it there, made it there, constructed there, the devices you're using will incorporate petroleum or built on it. It's really quite remarkable. So the power of that bill, the power of that currency, is tied to every single intention that is tied to human activity. And the reason it's apple green is because that color is literally a symbol associated with alchemical creativity. It is the alchemist color. It's the point at which you would take and bring that color up here. And we'll talk about that later in moving around chakras and later lesson talking about opening the third eye. But specifically, if symbolically, if we look at, there are three aspects which are known as the prima materia. These are the three prime elements, symbolically, that create other things, and they have colors. So over here we have Mercury, and it's yellow. We have salt, which is blue. And don't get this confused later, because this red and blue will mean something entirely different later. And sulfur, which is red. When I do my Star Trek lecture later in August at the public library here, this is going to be really, really, really important. Because Gene Roddenberry literally built the entire series around the prima materia. And if you understand just even momentarily that these are the corresponding colors of all the different uniforms that you would see in Star Trek, it's a bing, now you're like, oh, okay, I get it. Well, when you take yellow and blue, this is, salt is associated with stability and preservation, and yellow is associated with the mind. So if you combine yellow and blue, you get green, which is the capacity to preserve in concrete terms something from the mind. So think about the Green Lantern, right? The Green Lantern is truly the alchemist and magician who can transmute light and create solid objects with it, and they're always green because it's by force of will. Force of will that's driving that. So this is tied just to your money, right? And these are cognitive thought forms which essentially are free to learn about. The problem is that we make so many assumptions in the Congress of what we do every day. We just assume things just are. And the truth of it is that when you begin to study this material as an alchemist and as a symbologist, you realize that in fact nothing just is. Now, that brings me to something that's a really important point. I get called on this a lot, and I absolutely agree. Not everyone is doing this on purpose, okay? Like a lot of people, you're just feeling your way through it out there and it just feels good, which actually to me supplies yet another thing about human consciousness, right? The idea that perhaps it feels good is because we're tied to each other in such a significant way that when you do it right, that feels good, and when you don't do it right, it just doesn't seem to work right. In popular culture, we see this reflex happen all the time when they remake a movie and they don't just hit it right. And when they don't, the popular culture that has established itself understanding the movie was a certain way, now is approached with it a different way and they don't like it, they resist. It's like a mental antibody is attacking the symbol being used incorrectly. So in the same sense though, these symbols have been around for so long that it is entirely possible that the vast majority of people who are employing them have no real understanding or method or purpose behind their application. It's just that that's kind of the way we keep telling it. Now that's a component of how the esoteric is preserved. It needs to be resilient enough so that in the hands of ignorant people, it can still be preserved because they're just doing it the same way as we've always been doing it. And at last someone might get enough pieces together to go, well, this is probably why we've been doing it this way, which is what I do. And the discussion of symbols is a touchy area for me because symbols are so important to people. When we talk about the flag, that's something that's so important to people that they will, many places in this country might, act violently if you disrespected that article of cloth over there. I myself have taken an oath to protect it when I was in the military. So, I functioned, my first interest in flags actually came from my service in the Navy because I was a signalman and I was approached with a whole book full of flags, which is how the Navy and all the merchant vessels and military vessels communicate to each other visually as they're like riding alongside each other. They'll pull up a bunch of different flags. And someone like me would go, okay, they're going to be doing this, and it's going to take this long. You basically can get an idea without having to send a message. It's a pretty secure, line-of-sight form of communication that requires people to have a specific kind of knowledge. Again, it's occult information, right? Most everyone else thinks they're just pretty flags and pennants, They might not actually realize that one of the flags might be telling someone to steer clear of that vessel, because they're conducting some kind of operation. So those are also cognitive thought forms. Here's the thing though, there's an extra layer here that's going on because there's such a consistent application of these over and over and over again. In fact, over the weekend as I was preparing for this class, I did another Esoteric Smackdown, which I'll be publishing next week, superhero edition, and it's on Blizzard's game Overwatch, which is, the animation for it is just unbelievable. I mean, the shorts are beautiful. So I took time to do that, and it's clear that they're able to narrate and form symbolically stuff that's relevant to my work and easily decipherable as a consistent pattern. I believe that above the vast majority of people, let's say in Hollywood, who are working very hard to make money by formulating a movie, and I've got a couple folks, Alchemy, calling you out there, buddy. He mentioned, you know, there's literally schools out there, and I know of this, that people go to learn these formulas, right? And then they crank out these really poor scriptwriters. The reason they're poor scriptwriters is because the formula by itself is like taking the symbol outside of its context. You've got the bones, the skeleton, so you can guess, yeah, it might have been a dinosaur at some point, but you'll never get the color, you'll never get like the expression right, you know, whatever it did, because you just got the bare bones. The fleshing out of these symbols comes from being able to learn their stories. And so I get asked frequently, what kind of books do I use? Get yourself one of these. This is a great starting point. This is called the Element Encyclopedia of Secret Signs and Symbols. This is just basically a collection of symbols. Not all of them are shown, but they are explained. And it will get you at like the basement or ground level of what is taught about these symbols. And from that, you can extrapolate their deeper associated meanings. But until you actually get familiar with the fact that there's a whole book of these floating around, right? You'll never realize that you're surrounded by them all the time. We are literally in this room, completely surrounded by 100 different symbols and multiple cognitive thought forms of deep complexity, like the statue of Mithras slaying the bull that we talked about last week. So this is something that you want to get. It doesn't have to be this book, but something like this that can help you crack that code and begin to start seeing that certain symbols are being repeatedly used in certain contexts, regardless of culture. Another book that you want to get yourself in order to understand symbols, and it doesn't have to be this one, I just grabbed this off my shelf. This is a mythology visual quick reference guide. You need to start learning these symbols. You need to learn the stories behind the symbols, because it's the story that will give you the character of what you're looking at. If you're looking at a particular deity, you want to see not just what they look like, what are they doing, right? And remember, when you're looking at a god or a goddess, you are looking at a super duper complex cognitive thought form, wherein their entire body is expressing something. And that brings me to the next point. There is a huge difference between, or let me back up, not a difference. When dealing with symbols, the language of symbols is entirely visual. You can be completely deaf and interpret the symbol in perfect clarity because it is always something that you are looking at, which requires you to then consider that your symbol should be looked at from as many perspectives as possible. So flip it upside down, mirror it, reverse it, try to shift the colors. What happens if it's a black and white symbol? What happens if you reverse the color? What's the directionality and flow of the colors? How do the colors relate to each other? As you saw right here, this is just a brief example of how colors can tie to cognitive states, and how those cognitive states can tie to bigger pictures, okay? Let's see. So, any questions anywhere online? Anyone? No? Okay. And if you're just picking up online, I apologize. I'm still trying to figure out how to schedule the event and make the scheduled event actually tie to the link, because I'm using my phone again to record this live. All right, let's see. So, what's my time looking like? All right. Let's take a look at this flag. So we just finished the 4th of July, and this is something that we all celebrated, right? Independence Day, signing of the Declaration of Independence, and with it the establishment of this flag, which later was established as our Union of States. But what does this stuff mean? Like, we have all the romantic ideas of applesauce and freedom and, you know, and pie and, you know, tea parties. But why red, white, and blue? Why stars? Why a field of blue? What does this mean? Is there a deeper association? As part of this workshop, what we're going to do now is we're going to break this down, and it's going to take a little bit of time, because as we do, we're going to travel back in time. We're going to visit the sands of ancient Egypt. We're going to look at the crowns that the pharaohs wore, and we're going to realize that the Freemasons who built this country and built this flag, constructed it, knew full well what all that other stuff was, and that they were part of a greater fraternity of people. In fact, every nation which bears the colors red, white, and blue are part of this exact same fraternity. So that would include Great Britain, France, right? There's a bunch of countries like this. Countries that bear just the red and white have a different covenant, but no less important, and the blue is something that we'll discuss. So, red, white, blue, any takers? Any ideas? No? Yes? No? Okay, we will begin. Ancient Egypt. Are you ready to travel back in time with me? Why would I go to Egypt first? If I mentioned the dollar earlier, correct? And on the back of the dollar we have a pyramid with an all-seeing eye. At one point in one of my videos, I pointed out that the all-seeing eye and then the pyramid coming down like this, I suggested that this could be the sun setting over the ocean. And that this golden path then is the line of the sun as it moves out to the shoreline. Right? So, and in fact, the front of everyone, I'm outing myself here, the front of the cover slide of all my videos, right, with the guy walking on the water, it's from The Fountain. He's walking on the water, and of course, the angle looks just like this, and then there's this big tree here, right, and then you can see the reflection of the tree. It's this beautifully illustrated concept of the electric universe. Right? And this is the golden path. In ancient Egypt, the Pharaoh, in ancient Egypt then, and so in keeping mind, here's the sun. There are multiple pyramids, and I suggest to you that the pyramid shape is referential to that culture's interpretation of what it looks like to see the sun on the water. So when you get to the Wats of Asia, they have these really tall Wats they're like that. And so you get this like nice ribbon of water moving out underneath it, and of course the water's got this little, like that. In Egypt, of course, it's much broader, right, and you've got this nice beautiful pyramid. But remember, it's not finished, and the reason it's not finished is because the sun is on top of that, you know, moving its way down. The Pharaoh, and it didn't matter, Hatshepsut, oh goodness, never mind. I'll put the name up here in post-production. The only female pharaoh, she also wore a beard. And the beard that the pharaoh course, here's their little happy face, right? Little eyeballs right there. But the beard means that their head then becomes a symbol of the sun, right? And then the light is ascending. And the way to see that is actually to look behind them when they turn around, and the crown looks like this, and it wraps up down here in a little thing, and then it goes down like that. And then this is rays from behind. This is what their crown looks like from behind. So it's a little sun with rays coming off and descending in the water. So that's what you can do with a complex symbol. Now, why do I mention Egypt? Well, one, because the symbol's on the dollar. It helps to understand that. Two, because Freemasons were such a part of our country's establishment that George Washington was inaugurated in full Masonic regalia. Okay, when he became president, to establish that, yes, hey, we're part of the Brotherhood, and this is the way it's going to be. So understanding that, it then helps you to understand that they have a deep, abiding appreciation for Egyptian culture and symbology. It's all over the place. And as such, in Egypt, in ancient times, this is the Nile River Delta, and this is the Nile. And this area right up here, to the edge of the delta, this is called Lower Egypt. And from this point up, and it's Upper Egypt because you're getting up into the mountains, right? And this is Upper Egypt. And at one time, Egypt had two kings. And then later on, the two crowns were united into a single crown. I have that right here, so you guys can see this. The crown of Lower Egypt is red. And it looks like this. It's got this little thing, and it comes up the back like that. It has this little whoop, like that. Okay? That's the crown of Lower Egypt. And the crown of Upper Egypt is white. It has this little thing, and it does this little bumpy thing like that. Okay? Together, these two crowns, we have red and white. Lower Egypt is where all the money was made for Egypt, right? Because this is the Nile River Delta, and it moves out into the Mediterranean. Other nations which used red to identify themselves with mercantile trade would be the Phoenicians. And they had red and white sails with bars that looked exactly like the bars on our flag. Okay? So these two crowns united then provide red, the secular, and white, the spiritual. Now, why would red be tied with secular stuff? Why would white be tied with spiritual stuff? Here's where the breakdown of these symbols takes place. What is the most immediate evidence of mortality? Blood, right? The blood is the life. Is that not what Bram Stoker said? The shedding of blood is the shedding of life. Blood is red. Blood is tied to mortality. So you literally, in this world, it literally is blood in and blood out. You know, you begin this world as a mess, you end somewhat as a mess, and in between it's a mess. And it all has to do with this idea. So red is tied to mortality. The ocean and ocean-bearing countries establish this tie through what is called admiralty law. And this is actually the mercantile law that describes you as a person and establishes you within your government as, and this is a very complex thing, you're welcome to take it up, look at it. Look up your corporate fiction. Do a Google of your corporate fiction. And essentially, when you are born, this is the process. You come into life You are born and you go see the dock, right? And the dock gives you birth. And those are all nautical terms, right? Because when a ship comes into the dock, it has a berth. It's given papers to show what exactly took place and what was detached from the mothership. All of these things become taxable later, like your name. On your birth certificate is in capitis majora, which means it's all caps, which means it's not an actual person. That's the same thing that we do for companies. So you have a corporate fiction, and that's part of the symbol of this. I know it's like, but that's all part of this red and this mortality, that from start to finish, you're observed, and the observation has to do with money. The counterbalance to this is what happens in Upper Egypt. In Upper Egypt, this is where the spiritual development takes place. Now, why would white be the spiritual development? If this has to do with mortality, death, and transactions, moving from one state to another, which is what happens. In fact, here's another really cool symbol for you. This is called a delta. In terms of science, a delta means it's a point of transition of states from one state to another. So as fresh water is moving towards the Mediterranean north, downhill, by the time it hits the Nile River Delta, there's a transition point where it goes from being fresh water into salt water out here. And so when you see letters which relate to a change in states, they will almost always have to do with the delta, and delta is the fourth character in Greek. And so things that deal with four deal with the transition of states. So the 4th of July dealt with the transition of states, get it? Where we move from a state of oppression and dependence to a state of independence. They don't miss this. There's never a missed step. Like the whole idea of 1776, the idea of 76, that is 76, which is also the symbol for Capricorn. So the gas station, which is the union of 76, that's a reference to Saturn, because Capricorn is ruled by Saturn. So it just keeps coming at you, right? So why white? Well, this has to do with what white does for us. White mediates between the oppression of the sun and the earth itself. It's the clouds. So when you see white fluffy clouds, you realize that there will be relief. And if you live in the desert, there will most certainly be relief. So white clouds in the desert, big fluffy white, that means salvation. That means hope. And it ties you to the spirit because clouds are effervescent. They come, they go, they're sublime. They literally sublimate, they disappear. So the idea then is when you pop that crown into this crown, you do a couple really cool things. I really need another tissue paper. Oh, heavens.
Yes.
Do we have a tissue paper? Oh, there it is, thank you. Everyone live is like, where's the tissue paper? Okay, so when you pop these two crowns together, and this one comes up, this in the middle, you get this little doodad. If you were to look at this from the side, and there's this really cool explosion, a supernova explosion, 1987A, I think it is. I'll pop it up here so you guys can see it, and I'll even pop a slide in it. See, this is why post-production is good. You want to watch this later too. The explosion looks like this, and then it comes out like that, and it's double sheathed or double layered. So it looks just like the crown of Egypt, and then it does the same thing on the other side like this. And the idea is that crowns are an establishment of electromagnetic consciousness or presence, which is why Indian chiefs, right, they have the giant-sized ones, or tribal chiefs everywhere. They'll have these huge, huge crowns, displays, because the idea is, this is an expression of my consciousness, and it's everywhere. You know? So this here, for Egypt, then, is an expression of his consciousness, and Pharaoh being representative of two conscious states. Now the word Pharaoh is very, very important. And the conscious states are that he will now govern both material, temporal affairs, and spiritual affairs. This makes the Pharaoh king and priest. Okay? So, priest and king. Secular for king, priest is priest for spiritual stuff. So, but the Pharaoh wore one other crown. When it was time to go to war, the Pharaoh would wear a blue crown. And so the question then is, what's the deal with the blue crown, and why would you crown this? Remember, this is now an expression of my consciousness. If I put it on my head, that literally is where my head is at. Okay? So it's a complete expression to everyone. They don't have any question. I pop that blue crown on my head, things are going to happen right now. We're going to war. And you do that in Egypt, it was a serious thing. But the question is, why? What is it about the nature of the color blue that would lead you to go blue equals war? Because blue is also tied to some kind of protection, right? People think about true blue and all these other positive aspects. Again, you have to consider a desert, and you have to consider people who've endured what I would say they witnessed an actual ecological catastrophe. When Set slew Osiris, Set became the god of the wilderness and the desert because that's what happened. Wilderness and desert overtook Egypt, because when we go back far enough into the record, it's clear that Egypt used to be very wet, that there was a lot of trees all over the place, and now it's not wet. So Set dominated the land of Egypt, took it over, conquered it. And the question then is, remember we talked about who is Pharaoh? Who is Pharaoh? The Pharaoh is a representation, it means the White House, which of course, who sits in the White House? The president, right? He presides. He's Pharaoh. Anyway, he's got the colors. Anytime the president stands and he talks, he's got two of these or four, and you'll notice that you can communicate to the entire world what the talk is going to be about. So if you see the president ever get up, and blue is all over the place, where they fold the flag down. Remember, this is stagecraft, everybody, stagecraft. There is not a thing that goes on of camera live for the country of the United States that's not somehow or another massaged, tended to, or dealt with. And how they fold the flag for public consumption is a big deal. You see a lot of blue, that means he's going to talk about fighting. If you see a lot of this stuff, a lot of red or white, then he's going to talk about national domestic issues and issues of trade. And seriously, that's exactly what happens. Now, Pharaoh means the White House. The White House, and this is sort of, you have to chain this out. The goddess Nephthys is the woman of the house. Both she and Set have red hair, which ties them to mortality. In other words, that they are gods of this world, okay? And they're the only Egyptian gods that have red hair. The rest have lapis lazuli hair, which ties them to a previous state. Pharaoh is the sun. And so when Pharaoh stands up before Egypt and says, I am the living incarnation of Re, I'm the sun. I made flesh. The truth is we all are. That's the beauty of it, right? All of our consciousness is quickened. There's not a person on this planet who doesn't know everything to that big ball in the sky. Because if it wasn't there, we'd all be done, right? There would be no planet, it would be cold, it would be nothing, we'd be dead. So the sun is everything, and Pharaoh wearing both crowns, white and red, means that he is conducting his presence over spiritual and secular affairs. The sun does one other thing though. The sun engages in a battle every single day. And the battle the sun engages in is against every other god and star in the universe. And quite literally, the sun's pretty badass, because every morning it completely occludes and then occults the fact that there's a universe out there. You would never know. It won. It's just blue sky. That's it. That's all you get to see. Blue sky. There are no planets. There are no other stars. It's just this star. So when you're looking at it in terms of Kabbalah or trying to decipher a script and you see a solar character, you're going to look for someone who's a show-off, who's all about me, 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 me. You know, but also someone who's saving the day, right? Someone who will rush in, someone who will be selfless and self-sacrificing, and maybe someone who runs out of gas once in a while, like Iron Man. You know, there's a little and now he can't fight because he's got to recharge. The sun has to recharge, right? So it fights all day long and then it's got to stop. And then it gets back up and fights again. So solar characters in the movies will do that, where they'll have a limited duration of time that they can engage. So the sun is engaging in warfare, and so blue is tied to the act of conducting war. So, what we know right now, just from understanding history and understanding Egyptology and symbology, is that the red announces to the world that our country is an economic power. And that first and foremost, from top to bottom, because the first color on the top and the last color on the bottom is about economics. Okay? Fascinatingly enough, there are 7 bars. 7 is a number that is tied specifically to this star. So the septagram, like a 7-pointed star, speaks specifically to the use with the sun. We have 7 days of week. We have 7 visual colors in the natural spectrum. There's all sorts of 7s that are tied significantly to the presence of this star. And all of them are tied to our mortal experience. So 7 and the red, top to bottom. When you get to the white, there are 6 bars of white. And 6 should immediately pull any esotericist's mind right back to the planet Saturn and the goddess Isis. And Isis was represented also by a white vulture known as Nekhbet. And Nekhbet wears the white crown of Upper Egypt. So you can see this chain of custody, wherein the spiritual force is then tied to Saturn. And as I mentioned last week, every single religion out there that gives you any kind of instruction on how you are to behave is, by de facto, is tying you back to Saturn. Because Saturn's all about rules. Saturn's all about propriety. You're only supposed to have sex at this time. You're only supposed to party at this time. You should raise your kids at that time. You know, it's Ecclesiastes, right? In everything, you know, there's a season. So, the other thing to think about with the other thing to consider with the 6 bars, and this will get a little bit freaky. I really wasn't sure if I wanted to share every last symbolic nook and cranny of the flag, but I couldn't resist, so we're going to hit it. But, so we have 7 red, and we have 6 white. And so the 7 red gives us a 7-pointed star. And the 6 white give us that. Because if you take the 6 bars and put them together, they're all equidistant, the same length. If they're touching each other, it forms a Shapkanah, or a Star of David. Now, this is not a uniquely Jewish symbol in spite of what everyone would like to believe. And I have a video online discussing human ancestry and this symbol, and the fact that it is everywhere, in every country, every continent, and it is descriptive of something much greater. Feel free to check that video out, Human Ancestry and the Esoteric. Definitely, this is an extraordinarily significant symbol, which we will be discussing at greater length in other classes. But for now, I want you to consider what is a prepositional phrase. When I say the Star of David, what does that do, language-wise? It means that it's the possession of David's, right? That's like saying the car of David, or the phone of David. It's my thing. So the question then must be asked, who is David, right? Who is David? You have to deconstruct names in alchemy because names are everything. Names tell you everything, but you have to bring it all the way back to its core. David is Hebrew for beloved, okay? So this means beloved. So now, if you think only for a moment, Revelation was written by John the Beloved, okay? So that's a designation, and you understand that John also is Jack, and Jack is Jacob, and Jacob is the heel grabber, which ties Jacob to Mithra, who's grabbing the heel of the bull, which means Jacob is the son. So David is the son. So the Star of David is Saturn. And the Star of Isis is the sun. And we'll talk about the Star of Isis in just a second because her star looks like this. It's a 5-pointed star. And we have 50 of them all over our flag. So this symbol, for all of you guys out there who are, the 5-pointed star is nothing to be afraid of. None of these stars they're just geometries for one. But this particular geometry is unique. Because this geometry right here is the result of an intersection between Venus and the Earth as they orbit the Sun. And so as they go around together, Venus and the Sun will link up like this. And they'll hang along together for a little bit, and then they'll break up, and then they'll link up again, and they'll hang out. And each one of those, it forms a pentagon. Okay? But it's the object in the center that's of importance. They are surrounding the Sun. They're orbiting the Sun together. So the Star of Isis, and Isis is Saturn, is the Sun. Those are possessive terms, prepositional terms relating to each other. So this one here, in association with the US flag, is an association with the goddess Isis, who is also known as Columbia in poetry. So the country of the United States is run from what part of the country? The District of Columbia, the District of Isis. And that district conducts war powers. It's amazing, right? Like this is what, so when you look at this then, so these 50 stars, they all are representative of the Sun. They're speaking to the Sun and nations which are Luciferian and built on principles of freedom and liberty. That's what our country was founded on. We're going to go through a rather painful transition in the next few years because freedom and liberty, as we're seeing, are going to take a continued seat to law and order. It's a byproduct of living in the age of Aquarius. Everything leading up to this point was all about freedom and expansion and imperialism. Over. We're not doing it. I would doubt if we'd even get one more state on this flag. Sorry, Puerto Rico, but I'm not seeing it happen in your future. And when I explain to you why, you will probably be like, oh, I get it. So why, right? So first off, so you guys clear on this? So from top to bottom, the United States is an economic power, right? That conceals its spiritual force within itself. It's separate from the state, and that it allows for multiple expressions of spiritual pursuit. And the one thing that brings us together every time is war. That's it. Which is why the blue is conducted in a complete square field, right? With the 50 stars, because this is when we unify. We might have all sorts of fights between ourselves, but don't you dare pick on us, because rah, and then we do this, and we pull that red, white, and blue out, and we unify as a single nation. That's a cool thing to me. I actually really like the flag for that. That message alone, to me, is quite beautiful. That we are focused on things that cause us to grow as a nation, that we leave ourselves alone spiritually, and don't pick on us, because that's what we do. So that is what's learned as a result of deconstruction of an extraordinarily elegant cognitive thought form, which is the flag of the United States. Now there's one more thing, the positionality of the stars. There's a reason they're placed as they are, and they reveal something that to some might be alarming. Because I understand that the flag is constructed on Kabbalistic principles, and because I understand that the 7 and the 6 ties itself to the idea of Capricorn, which ties itself to Saturn, but also 7 and 6 make 13. It's a secondary reference to Saturn through the god Osiris, who was dismembered by his brother, and only 13 parts were recovered by Isis and Nephthys. The 14th, his phallus, was missing. So 13 ties to this. Yeah, in fact, just a brief segue since I saw your face scrunch up. Horus is produced as a result of what can only be a cuckold of Osiris, because obviously he couldn't have a phallus, and Isis in the record supplies a golden phallus and then has Horus, who looks nothing like his dad, right? Because he's got a bird face. Right? Isis and Osiris both have human countenance because they're gods of a previous age. Any god of a latter age will have an animus, an animal countenance, because they're tied to Set and his influence. So who's his daddy? Right? Horus's daddy is Set. So anyway, so as we're counting these, let's take a look here for just a moment. We have 50 stars on this flag, and they could have arranged them in quite a few different arrangements. We actually, and I had to look this up this morning because I wanted to make sure my facts were right. The 50th star was the state of Hawaii in 1959. So the timing of this again is perfect, because you would expect that as you move into the age of Aquarius that you would pull this star out. Now, let's take a look at this flag for a second. So on the top, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 stars, okay? And what you want to do is you want to group these into groups of 2, all right? So we have 6 stars, and then right under that, we have 5 stars, okay? So this gives us the number 11, all right? When you look at the flag and you're making a graph, because to decipher a code like this, you look for where the repetition resumes, okay? So the first 2 lines are unique, and then they just are repeating those 2 lines over and over and over again, right? So in a codified statement, at the point of repetition, that's where you stop decoding and you go back and you look at what's being presented. So we have a 6 and a 5, which gives us an 11. Then if you go down horizontally on the side, going down sideways, right? So this is across. Going down the side, we have a 5, and then we have a 4. Okay? And that's the pattern there, 5 and a 4, which gives us a 9. (9/11), ring a bell? It's written on the flag. Now, you have to realize 9/11 was used many times before as an opportunity, like in 1991. George Herbert Walker Bush got in front of the House of Representatives, Senate combined, and delivered a delightful talk about the New World Order, where he absolutely calls it a New World Order, and talks about how this coming age will be an age of law, where the law of the jungle won't work, and the rule of order will prevail. Okay, that was 9/11, 1991. 10 years later, we get a brand new 9/11, which completely alters the consciousness of every human on the planet. And it happened on this flag's territory. Now, what are these numbers? These numbers represent Kabbalistic points within the tree of life. So I'm going to quickly just draw the tree for you. Okay? This is the tree of life. When counting down, it goes 1, 2, 3, blah, 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 4, 5, 6, oh, sorry, 7, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. Okay? This is an area, and we're going to cover this later, tied to the moon. And it's called Yesen. This particular point in the tree is tied with the unconscious mind, the collective unconscious mind. And it's a gateway point in meditation, when you're working through a meditation into a higher ordered state under either Venus or Mercury or anything else. Right up here is the invisible 11th Sephiroth, which is in what is known as Da'ath. It's the great void. So the idea of having something tied to this progress is the idea of being able to move it from something like an American dream in an unconscious state to something beyond, to leap the gap, to create something new. So anytime you see this kind of used, a 9/11 reference, it's skipping the number 10, right? The idea is that it's those who are preaching all the fear stuff, they're like, they want to be gods and they want to take over the... No, this is something you can use for yourself as well. This is a meditative concept, because 9 ultimately has this really unique mathematical property where it either is referential to itself in multiplication or it disappears entirely in addition when you break it down numerologically. So that, let's say if I go 9 times 2, that gives me 18, which then reduces back to 9, right? And if I go 9 plus 2, that gives me 11, right? Which then the 9 disappears entirely because this reduces down to a 2. Right? 9 is magic. So you throw 9 into an esoteric equation, and it allows you to do a couple different things. You throw it into the construction of a nation, and you can do a great number of other things. Of course, there's more, but I don't want to blow your brains away too much. How much time do we have? Oh, and we're almost done. Look at that. Oh my gosh, I can't believe I got us through the flag, you guys. Okay, you guys have any questions? Because this is totally a good time to ask questions. Did I blow your minds? Are you guys like, whoa? So you proud to be American? You should be. This alone, this symbol's worth standing up for. It really is. The ideas behind this, because these are good ideas. These are beautiful, right? This is neat, and something that's definitely worthwhile. So next week we're going to talk about mythology. It's going to be fun. You're getting the sense. I'm kind of dipping you in the water a little bit at a time, right? Last week we just sort of talked about that alchemy deals with this kind of stuff, and then this week we dipped in real heavy duty into a singular symbol that all of us see every day. We've probably all stood up and sung about it or pledged allegiance to it, but now you know what it's about and where its roots and core are. I think that's awesome. All right, any other questions? No? All right, I'll see you guys next week. Thank you, everybody. You guys are awesome. Thank you. Thank you, Internet. We'll see you next week.